My name is Michelle. I work long, boring hours that pay well enough to keep my life tidy, an apartment with decent light, groceries that don't expire before I remember them, and a bank account that makes my mother sigh with relief. What's at stake, at least in the moment that matters? My credit, my sanity, and the small private belief that if something bad happened, adult me could handle it without drama. It starts at 6:12 a.m. with the kind of alert that makes your chest hollow out. Fraud alert. $7,250 charge. 5 airline tickets to Santorini. I stare at my phone until the notification pixelates. The name on the charge isn't mine. The confirmation email lists 5 seats, all booked under other names, all leaving in 3 weeks. I don't know anyone who's going to Santorini. I don't know anyone who'd pick me to be their unwitting co-sponsor of a Greek island vacation. My first, stupid thought is logistical. Who in my life would do this? Then the second, sharper one arrives, memory like a splinter. Last Thanksgiving, my mother, Linda, over coffee and her endless practicalities, said in passing, "Those tickets are too expensive. If you can't afford them, you shouldn't be buying them." It was the typical maternal thrift lecture, the kind of line that hangs in the air like lint. I'd laughed it off then. Now it drones at me, a tiny, guilty voice. I don't linger. I call my credit card company and move like someone who has practiced this exact maneuver in a dozen worst-case scenarios. Lock the account. File a dispute. Ask to speak to fraud. The representative, patient and clipped, tells me what I already know and what I need to hear. They'll freeze new charges and start an investigation, but I'll need to provide whatever evidence I can. They give me a case number, a string of digits that feels more like a bandage than a cure. Next, I do the adult thing that feels petty and necessary. I change every password connected to my life. Email, banking, my loyalty accounts, the one I use to buy groceries online. I flip on two-factor authentication like a switch. I go through my saved payment methods and, heart lurch, see an entry labeled family. Not subtle, not anonymous. A named shortcut that had been saved for convenience for, just use mom's card, gestures that became a habit. It's like finding a note in a jacket pocket, proving you've been slotted into someone else's plan without agreeing to the map. I sit back and count, not with the cool arithmetic of a spreadsheet, but with the bitter math of someone suddenly realizing their generosity was not a kindness, but a recurring subscription. Those saved card details meant any relative with access to mom's computer or my credentials could, with 2 clicks, make my account their personal safety net. I feel small and furious and more than a little foolish. Before I can let myself sink into the full sulk of betrayal, I take the obvious, boring next steps. I screenshot emails, I save the fraud alert, I note the transaction details with the absurd diligence of someone preparing to document a crime scene in Excel. I leave a voicemail for mom that is unusually spare, a recorded call me that is meant to be civil and contains a quiet, simmering question. The rest of the day is a fog of changing passwords, waiting on hold, and forcing myself not to compose the scathing texts I'll later delete. That night, I lie awake thinking of tickets to Santorini I never bought, and the small, gradual ways trust had been converted into convenience. Whoever did this didn't want to ruin anything dramatic. They wanted to keep living like they were entitled to my balance. That realization is worse than the money. It's the slow theft of the assumption that family and trust are the same thing. So I take a breath, close my eyes, and prepare to be a person who documents everything. Locking the card felt like the first practical inch of revenge. Not spectacle, not a scream, just the quiet, immovable act of saying no. They started blowing up my phone within an hour of the fraud alert. First, a text from Ethan. "Michelle? Something about my flights got canceled? Call me." Then a voicemail from Kara, breathless and loud enough to be her own panic attack. "Did you cancel our trip? Mom's freaking out. Dad's on his way. What did you do?" My phone turned into a chorus of confusion and entitlement. When I called back, their voices slid between each other like a badly mixed podcast. Tom, my dad, sounded clipped, trying to steer the conversation away from a direct question. Linda was already on damage control autopilot, voice dipped low and apologetic. Ethan kept cutting in, defensively repeating that he just reactivated something on the account because, "Michelle, we thought it was okay." Kara kept saying, I didn't know, I swear, with the kind of panicked sincerity that has never once paid a bill. Their panic wasn't for me. It was for the inconvenience, the canceled reservation, the potential embarrassment, the logistics. I listened to them talk around me like I was a weather report, mildly inconvenient, somewhat blustery, not a storm. That's when the slow, awful math started doing somersaults in my head. Small texts asking for Venmo here, advances on rent there, can you cover my last-minute car repair? Calls. None of them framed as debts. All of them framed as favors I was happy to grant. Favor became habit. Habit became expectation. I'd always told myself I did it because I cared. I told myself I was generous. I told myself I was lucky enough to help. Sitting there on the couch with the fraud alert still pulsing on my phone, it felt a lot less like generosity and a lot more like being on an endless subscription plan called Family Lifetime Access. Those just this once moments stacked into a mountain of unpaid IOUs and quiet apologies that never turned into repayment plans. 3 days after the ticket alert, I got the call that made the problem real in a different way. Daniel Park from the bank, calm, professional, the kind of voice that reads numbers like scripture, walked me through what they'd found. Ma'am, he said, we see that an authorized user was added to your account 4 months ago. The account activity shows a reactivation under an authorized user profile with a login that matched your credentials. Since then, there have been repeated charges totaling $9,540, including the recent airline purchase. Daniel read me dates and amounts like a ledger reciting a small catastrophe, a string of Amazon orders, a rental car payment, a handful of restaurant tabs, utility payments, and then the 5 Santorini seats that pushed the total into teeth-gritting territory. He emphasized that the pattern looked intentional. Reactivation, incremental charges, then a big purchase. The old test-the-water method fraudsters use when they want to keep access while flying under the radar. When he said, authorized user, my first reflex was to think of strangers picking pockets. Then he said the phrase that stung the most. The reactivation was completed using login credentials associated with your account. In plain language, whoever did this used something that came from me, a password, a saved login. Whether it was accidental, sloppy, or malicious didn't matter in that phone call. The bank was documenting the facts. The rest was family politics. I told Daniel I suspected who it was. I didn't enjoy saying Ethan's name out loud, but saying it made the air in the room thinner. Daniel explained next steps: dispute protocols, evidence collection, a fraud investigation that could take weeks. He told me to keep records, to save any correspondence, and not to confront anyone in a way that might compromise the bank's inquiry. It was business speak and also an implicit warning. This was now bigger than me being mad on a Wednesday night. When I hung up, my hands were oddly steady. The steadiness wasn't peace. It was the flat, surgical calm you get when you decide to catalog damage. I started writing dates of loans I'd covered, times I'd paid a bill and forgotten to ask for repayment, the night my mom cried about how you always keep the family afloat. Each entry felt like a small stitch pulling loose something that had been frayed for years. Confrontation buzzed at the edges. The calls, the passive-aggressive group texts, the flurry of explanations that smelled like excuses. But behind all of it was a simple, ugly truth I'd been avoiding. I had been the family safety net, and someone had decided my net was a trampoline. Knowing the bank had a file on the charges changed the tone inside me. It was no longer hypothetical. There was a paper trail, someone else acknowledging that money had moved and that it wasn't mine to give. I tucked that knowledge into my pocket like a sharp coin and waited for the investigation to do its quiet work while I prepared to do mine. Collect, document, and figure out what ending I wanted to write for this chapter. I called them all and told them what I'd done. I said it flat. I've filed a fraud claim with the bank. There's an investigation. I gave names. I said Ethan's name, and I said I was going to let the bank sort it out. I thought bluntness would make this simpler. I thought wrong. Their reaction wasn't contrition. It was a coordinated shrug that felt practiced. Linda's voice went soft in a way that has nothing to do with worry and everything to do with direction. Michelle, are you sure you're not overreacting? This is a family matter. Tom started with the pity. That tone a parent uses when they want to neuter an argument without having an argument. Kara cycled between outrage and a wounded gaslit, "You're making us out to be thieves." Then the threats crept in, polite and legal sounding like mildew. "You're jeopardizing your career," Ethan said in a text that managed to be both blunt and performatively concerned. "Do you really want this on your record?" Kara posted a screenshot of a private message, cropped, captioned, and shared widely enough to make a ripple across my feed. It portrayed me as irrational, unstable, and absurdly, financially irresponsible. Linda, meanwhile, did something I still can't listen to without my stomach flipping. She called my supervisor, Rebecca Cole, and told her that I was under extreme stress and might be experiencing a breakdown from overwork. Rebecca is the kind of manager who notices when someone stops replying to emails. She called me the same afternoon, sounding like she wanted to schedule a meeting, not to punish me, but to see if I was okay. Her voice was careful. It had the professional concern of someone who doesn't want to be dragged into family drama, but will protect their team if necessary. I felt that call land like a second fraud, this time on my competence. It wasn't just my bank account they were trying to drain. They were trying to withdraw trust from the reservoir I'd used to keep my life afloat. Now my professional reputation, something I'd built and polished, was being threatened with rumor and implication. The fear in their tone was performative. What if Michelle cracks and makes us look bad? The subtext was clear. Punish the whistleblower. The social media pieces were the worst kind of petty theater. Ethan and Kara sewed a narrative. I was dramatic, I was unstable, I had snapped. Friends and distant cousins chimed in with speculative comments. A few of my colleagues saw the posts. The office grapevine, that small, efficient beast, hummed with the headlines they'd been handed. What they hoped for was simple. Intimidate me into silence. Make the cost of pursuing the bank claim higher than the cost of swallowing another theft. Use guilt, reputation, and public shame as a kind of currency. It's an old playbook. Weaponize family loyalty and social leverage until the person who says no feels like the villain. Instead of crumbling, something in me tightened, precise and cold. I felt annoyance, not panic. I felt the clarity that comes when someone aims to gaslight you and you can see the matches in their hands. For every allegation they launched, I started keeping a counter. Dates, times, screenshots of their posts and messages, a record of Linda's call to Rebecca. I texted Rebecca and explained, calmly and succinctly, that there was an active investigation and that I would keep her updated. I didn't flood her with drama. I gave facts. They wanted spectacle. I decided to deliver documentation. They wanted to make me small. I decided to make the truth too awkward to ignore. It felt less like retaliation and more like a surgical response, methodical, unemotional, and above all, irreversible. After the gaslighting and the smear campaign, I stopped relying on memory and started relying on evidence. Memory is soft, paper and pixels are sharp. I pulled my laptop onto the kitchen table, brewed coffee the color of apology, and opened a blank spreadsheet that I named, with very little sense of humor, Family Audit Michelle. Column headers became my small army. Date, payee, amount, method, Venmo, check, bank transfer, reason, evidence, screenshot, receipt, notes. I wrote everything. The nights I covered rent when Kara's roommate forgot to pay. The $300 I wired to Ethan the month his car died. The Amazon order I paid for that showed up at mom's address, but was for the kids. I matched each entry with whatever proof I had. Bank statements, text threads, old Venmo notes that read like tiny casual contracts. I dug through 8 years of emails and receipts. Each row felt like a little reclamation. Daniel from the bank was more helpful than I expected. He set aside time to go line by line through my statements while I dictated. June 3rd, $420 to Kara via Zelle, note, rent plus. And he flagged transactions tied to the authorized user profile. His voice was a horizontal line of professionalism. No judgment, only ledgers. He scanned and emailed me PDFs, stamped them with identifiers for the bank's case file, and told me to keep them backed up in 2 places. So I did. Local encrypted drive and a cloud folder labeled with the same dreely precise case number the fraud team had given me. I started leaving audio notes for myself, short, factual voice memos saved in a folder titled Chronicle. June 3, paid Kara rent via Zelle. Text 61 shows request. Evidence saved. Saying the dates out loud crystallized them. It also felt a little like talking to future me, the woman who wouldn't be gaslit into uncertainty. Those voice files became my therapy and my alibi. Dr. Emily Stevens, a colleague who once borrowed a stapler and returned it with a sympathy card, reached out quietly. She didn't do performative support. She sent one message. I believe you. If you need a written note about anything affecting work, I've got your back. Later, she stopped by my desk, left a thermos of tea, and said, with that half smile people use when they don't want to be dramatic, but will do the necessary thing, document everything. People underestimate how persuasive a spreadsheet is. She offered to be a character reference if things escalated at work. Her small, steady presence felt like a lifeline cut from ordinary office kindness. A week into this, Tom, my father, came by. He knocked the way people knock when they've rehearsed 100 apologies and none of them landed quite right. I made coffee because my habits are stubborn. He took a cup but didn't drink. He sat like someone expecting me to forgive with the speed of a parent flipping a channel. I talked to Ethan, he said, voice trying for conciliatory and landing on evasive. He says he reactivated the account. He says it was a mistake. He fumbled for the right word. He didn't mean to cause trouble. He offered, in hesitant increments, a number that looked small next to what the bank had cataloged. We can cover some of it. 2,000. Maybe 3. I can pull something from consulting. He waved as if that made it less of an offer than a firm plan. I could see the arithmetic in his head. Partial repayment equals patched dignity. I could hear the subtext. Keep family intact, minimize scandal, move on. It was a PR play with worn velvet. I don't want your charity, I said. I surprised myself with how calm I sounded. Calm is a useful tone when you don't want to be unnerved into pleading. This isn't about money only. It's about trust. It's about being treated like a bank and not like a daughter. I'm not interested in a partial repair, so we can go back to pretending nothing happened. He tried the "but your family" line, the one parents use like a shield and a glove. You are family, Michelle. That's why I want to help us move past this without... I am family, I interrupted. That's the reason I'm not taking a bandage from you. If you want to repair this, it starts with accountability. It starts with recognizing what was done and making it right in full. Respect isn't a discount code. He looked like a man calculating the political cost of truth. He guessed at how much I wanted. Money, apology, reconciliation. He offered a smaller apology than the situation deserved, and a smaller sum than the ledger showed. I didn't accept. I didn't raise my voice. I simply boxed my boundary in words and left the door for him to choose whether to walk through it honestly or not at all. When he left, he put the offered check on the table and then, after a long minute, tucked it back into his wallet. He promised to talk to Spencer, to handle it, and he left with the fragile politeness of someone who'd attempted damage control and discovered the volcano still smoking. I felt the room settle into a new shape when he closed the door. There was no immediate catharsis, only a clean, exhausting clarity. Documentation had turned a stew of resentment into a file drawer of facts. My spreadsheet wasn't vindictive. It was the scaffolding for the next move. The audio notes weren't melodrama. They were timestamps. I went back to my documents, opened the Chronicle folder, and recorded a short memo. Father visited, offered partial payment, refused, continuing to document. Next, consolidate evidence packet for Aunt Martha and the bank. Then I closed my laptop, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself sit with the shame turned into action. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like preparation. I did the adult thing nobody wants to do. I turned my spreadsheet into a bill. It wasn't a dramatic, glittering ransom note. It was a professional PDF titled Invoice, Account Reconciliation, $9,540 with my name, a clear breakdown, and an itemized list that read like a sad little grocery receipt for other people's irresponsibility. 1. Repeated unauthorized purchases, authorized user reactivation, $3,120. 2. Rent advances and covered utilities, 2019 to 2024, $2,850. 3. Car repairs and emergency transfers to Ethan, $1,200. 4. Household purchases billed to my card, Amazon groceries, $1,170. Additional banking fees and dispute costs, $300 total, $9,540. Underneath, in neat patient type, I attached evidence: screenshots, bank-stamped PDFs from Daniel, Elise's texts, Aunt Martha's annotated ledger notes, and my own voice memo transcripts. I sent the invoice by email to Mom and Dad, CC'd Ethan and Kara, and copied it to Aunt Martha with a note that read, simply, attached, itemized documentation. I'd like to resolve this by 10/20. Please review before we meet. I also mailed a certified hard copy because bureaucracy is a humble, quiet vengeance. When Aunt Martha replied, curt and in a font that implied ledgers breathe better when not lied to, she agreed to attend the family dinner I'd scheduled. I invited Tom and Linda under the guise of family discussion. I put the dinner at a neutral restaurant, the kind of place with linen napkins and servers who don't eavesdrop on your family trauma. I wanted witnesses. Witnesses with spreadsheets and legal-sounding email headers. I showed up early, carrying the printed packet like a prop in a courtroom drama I did not want to star in. My hands were steady because I had rehearsed nothing, only facts. When they arrived, they sat like a jury who'd been bribed with nostalgia. Tom's face was the same one he wears when he's trying to decide whether to be stern or charming. Linda kept rearranging her napkin. I started slow. No raised voice, no theatrics. I placed the invoice on the table and said, I compiled this to show what's been happening with my account and how much it's cost me. I explained the bank's findings, the authorized user reactivation, and the chain of small charges that had become a $9,000 problem. I laid out the photocopies, the emails, Elise's screenshots, and Aunt Martha's notes, one by one. They all sat there like evidence on a linoleum counter. Undeniable and mundane. At first, they tried the usual stratagems: confusion, astonishment, performative hurt. We never meant for this to get so out of hand, Linda said, her voice trained to do contrition at low wattage. Tom muttered something about miscommunications. But then I said the sentence that cleared the room of fog. This is an invoice for the unauthorized use of my account and the unpaid debts I've covered. I'm asking for repayment of $1,540 by the date in the email. I don't want to lecture about family. I want restitution. There was a long, polite pause, then Ethan's mouth moved. He started with the half apology that usually comes from people who plan their excuses in advance. Michelle, I didn't think it was a big deal. We needed help. I reactivated the account because Mom asked me to. I thought it would make things easier. He trailed off, waiting for shock or fury. Kara chimed in with a voice pitched somewhere between guilt and pleading. I didn't know it was your card. I just used it because it said family on the saved payment, and I assumed. Their confessions were small, halting things, like people trying to squeeze truth out of a too-tight sweater. But then, the part I didn't expect, Tom's face went very still. He looked down at the invoice, at Aunt Martha beside him, and then he admitted it, without the flinch people usually use to disguise complicity. I knew, he said. The word was a stone. I knew Ethan had access to it. I thought I could control it. I thought I was fixing things. He looked at me and there was no rehearsed apology left in his face, only the tired arithmetic of a man who'd been using a shortcut and got called out for the cost. I should have stopped it. I'm sorry. That admission, that quiet, small honesty, landed harder than any shouting could have. Ethan and Kara's confessions shifted from defensive to remorseful. Ethan's voice finally sounded like the person I recognized as my brother, the one who once shared his candy bar with me at 8 years old. Not the one who'd treated my bank account like a communal snack table. Kara swallowed and said, I'm sorry, Michelle. I never meant to hurt you. It wasn't a miraculous absolution. It was messy and awkward and real. I handed the invoice back across the table and said what I'd rehearsed with a bland, necessary clarity. I don't want to humiliate anyone. I want accountability. I'm not interested in theatrics or half measures. I need full repayment, and I need boundaries so this never happens again. Then, because I wanted the moment to be both symbolic and terminal, I pulled a small keyring from my pocket. It was a pair of old house keys I'd kept for years. the spare to my parents' place they'd once insisted I keep just in case. I set them on the table and pushed them toward the center. "I'm returning these," I said. I won't be the family's emergency key anymore. The gesture felt like pressing a hard reset. It amused me that the keys clinked like small metal mic drops. I also told them some personal news I'd been holding. I'd found a new apartment, closer to work, cheaper than what I'd been subsidizing by default. I'd refinanced the remaining student loans to a better rate, and I'd set up an emergency fund I intended to keep just for myself. The point wasn't to flaunt, it was to display that I was moving toward autonomy, and I expected them to respect that. Aunt Martha, who'd taken in every page like a court stenographer, simply folded her hands and said, "We'll review these entries. If what she's presented is accurate, I'll recommend a full reconciliation and appropriate restitution from family accounts that show misallocation." She did not say the word forensic lightly. Her tone suggested ledgers don't forgive. They simply record. The rest of the dinner was a slow, awkward unwinding. People tried to apologize, some with sincerity, some with the clumsy apologies of those who can't imagine why what they did was wrong. I accepted some, the ones that felt genuine, and I kept a few things for myself. The knowledge that I had stood up, the paper trail that would not be erased by charm, and the keys that were now visibly off the chain. When we left the restaurant, the air felt colder but sharper. The confessions were out in the open. The invoice was no longer a threat. It was a plan. They knew I would pursue the $9,540. They knew Aunt Martha and the bank had documentation. They knew this was no longer a private family squabble you could hush with a casserole and a whispered, "Forgive and forget." Walking to my car, the weight of the keys gone, I felt lighter in a way that surprised me. It wasn't triumph so much as relief. The kind you get when you stop carrying someone else's debt and start carrying your own choices. The dinner hadn't fixed everything. It had exposed it. That, I decided, was the only first step that mattered. Dust settled, reality didn't explode. It eroded. Slowly, methodically, piece by piece, the way truth usually wins. The bank finished its investigation first. Daniel called me one morning with his steady, almost clinical tone. "Miss Lewis, the evidence was sufficient. The charges will be reversed and your account reinstated. Law enforcement may contact you regarding the unauthorized use." I thanked him with the weird kind of politeness that feels too small for the relief it carries. The credit was restored. The fraud claim was closed. On paper, I was whole again. Ethan wasn't so lucky. He got a letter from the bank's legal department outlining possible fraud charges. Possible hung in the air like a thunderhead. Aunt Martha confirmed what I already suspected. The family trust had flagged 2 of his accounts for misallocated disbursements. His consulting gigs dried up when word got around that his name had appeared in a formal audit. Tom, my father, lost something quieter but more permanent: reputation. Aunt Martha formally reported him to the board overseeing the trust's management, which revoked his consulting privileges pending review. In practical terms, it meant he couldn't touch a ledger or sign a reimbursement form again. When he called me after that, he didn't sound angry. He sounded smaller. "You were right," he said. "I let it happen because it was easier than admitting we were wrong." Then a pause long enough to count as real remorse. "I'm sorry." A week later, a certified envelope arrived. Inside, a check made out to me for $9,540, signed jointly by my parents. No note, just the number, written neatly, with that faintly ceremonial gravity of guilt rendered in ink. I deposited it. Then I did something that surprised even me. I didn't keep it. It wasn't about moral purity or saintly detachment. It was about closure. I took the full amount and worked with the local nursing school, my alma mater, to create a micro-scholarship for students who were supporting family members while studying full-time. The Lewis Resilience Fund, they called it, because I refused to name it after the family that inspired it. It was an irony that tasted better than revenge, turning debt into dignity. Life after that didn't suddenly sparkle with cinematic happiness. It grew incrementally into peace. I moved into my new apartment. High windows, walls the color of sanity, no shared accounts. I started painting again, not because I was good, but because I could afford canvases without guilt. Dr. Emily and I started walking together after work, two quiet people talking about ethics and tea blends. I dated a man who paid for his own dinner. When July rolled around, I invited the small circle of people who'd held me up, Aunt Martha, Dr. Emily, and Elise, to a backyard barbecue. I called it, half as a joke and half as ceremony, Financial Independence Day. We grilled, we laughed, and I made a toast with sparkling cider because, for once, my celebration didn't need anything stronger. To paying ourselves back, I said, glass raised. Not just the money, the time, the sanity, the peace. Martha clinked my glass. Elise smiled like someone who'd closed a wound. Emily nodded with that subtle grin she saves for quiet victories. And that was it. No grand finale, no slow-motion montage, just the unmistakable feeling that my life was mine again. Not the family safety net, not the fallback plan, just Michelle, solvent, scarred, and steady.